Okay, we are back for session 5 of Esther, beginning in chapter 2, verse 19 today. So we did the bulk of chapter 2 last week, and the bulk of chapter 2 is the story of Esther replacing Vashti. Esther pleases the king. She physically pleases the king. The king has been having this prolonged contest where he brings in all these beautiful women from throughout the empire, and spends one night with each, and he is picking the one that he likes the best. And Esther has gained his favor, but we also have found that Esther seems to be gaining favor with everybody else. Haggai, the guy who's in charge of the house of women, the harem, if you will, and all the others in the palace that she's running into. So there's something winsome about this young woman, more than simply her physical beauty, but she is being portrayed as someone who is, people warm up to her. She gains favor in their sight. She is simple, and she doesn't take anything extra extravagant with her to see the king. She is a lady who yields to her uncle Mordecai. She yields to the advice of Haggai. So she comes across, we got a pretty good character sketch of Esther building so far. So we've had kind of a character sketch of Ahasuerus, Xerxes, the king, and now we've got this character sketch of Esther, and we're going to dig a little more deeply into her uncle Mordecai and his arch nemesis Haman as we go in further today. In the Purim celebration in the Jewish tradition, Mordecai always gets a hooray or a yay or cheers, and Haman always gets the boos. So we're not going to interrupt with cheers and boos today, but at the end of our whole journey here, we will try to do the reading of the Esther scroll as best we can according to tradition, and we will do all the yaying and booing, and it'll be a great time. So that's what we'll do. Any questions about the first chapter and 2/3 before we dig into 2:19 today? Any questions at all? All right, silence says we're ready. Let's do Esther 2, 19, and 20. Esther 2, Bill has this, Esther 2, 19, and 20.
When the virgins were assembled the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do. So she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions, as she had done when he was bringing her up.
Okay, thank you, Bill. These two verses are relatively puzzling, especially that first phrase, when the virgins were gathered a second time, is how the Hebrew is rendered there. And the shortest and best answer is that the scholars have no idea what is meant by these virgins being gathered a second time. One of the commentaries I was reading says you will find as many views as commentaries as to what to do with this line. Why are we gathering virgins again? We just gathered virgins, and Esther was the winner. What are we doing now? So there's a few different, theories about this. Theories are always interesting if we don't, know anything else. And this is how doctoral students are able to write papers and get degrees and that sort of thing. So a few options, this virgins being gathered a second time. One is that this is Xerxes' insatiability. He obviously already had a house of women before the whole competition to find Esther, and there were obviously already two halves to that house, the hadn't yet been with the king and the had been with the king side of the house. And so it's not really surprising, I suppose, that he would continue to bring in women to sleep with, because that's the kind of guy Xerxes is. So that's possible. Also possible the second time is just simply a reference to what has happened. The women who lost the contest, so to speak, are consigned to the concubine half of the house, and that's where they're going to be forever unless the king calls on them. So maybe that second gathering, moving from the care of Haggai to Shazgaz, as was described in the previous verses. It's also possible that this gathering for a second time is for a banquet, the banquet of Esther. So the second gathering was you all get together for Esther's banquet and celebrate the woman who beat you all out. Sounds like a great time, right? Those are some of the possibilities. These verses are so puzzling that in the two Greek manuscripts we have of Esther, they leave verses 19 and 20 out. In fact, if you were to read seamlessly from verse 18 to verse 21, you would get all the details you would need about the story, and you wouldn't be losing anything, except for this line about a gathering for the second time that we really don't know what it means. So that's a little bit about the line that nobody knows what it means. But hey, it's there and it's fun to talk about. And much ink has been spilt over things in the Bible we don't understand, and this is no exception to that. Mordecai, however, is up to what? What is Mordecai doing? Snooping. That's one interpretation. The text says he is sitting at the king's gate. Probably not snooping, actually. Probably sitting at the king's gate is something to do with his station or his position, and it's probably more than just being a gatekeeper. The archaeologists have done some digging in the dirt in Persia, and they found one of these ancient Persian palaces. Keep in mind, Susa was one of four capital cities that the Persian kings were maintaining. Not one, not two, not three, but four capital cities. And at one of these they've excavated, they find the king's gate is not just like a wrought iron gate. The king's gate is like a building complex, as you come in. So a number of administrative officials would be working at the king's gate. So for Mordecai to be sitting at the king's gate does not necessarily mean that he is the gatekeeper. Neither does it mean that he's sitting outside the gate, like literally, like hoping for scoops on the inside, but that he's probably an official of some kind. Some have suggested he's a legal official. So in the ancient world in general, you'll read about disputes, legal disputes being settled at the town gate, at the city gate. So some have suggested he was in a legal capacity like that. Others have suggested he's like Ahasuerus' secret police because of the plot he's about to discover here. We really don't know that specifically, though. We do think, though, he's some kind of official and in the complex there of Xerxes, because he was in position to linger outside of the courtyard of the women when Esther was in there and get information. So he's got connections. And then here he's going to be in position to hear about this plot against the king. So sitting at the king's gate probably means he is a worker for the king, some kind of official servant of the king. Questions about Mordecai's role or station? Okay. Verse 20, what has Esther done? Kept the secret of what? Two secrets, actually.
Well, first, what her nationality was. Secondly, that she was related to Mordecai.
Right. She's keeping her family lineage and her nationality, that she's Jewish, hidden because Mordecai said so. Back in chapter 2, verse 10, Mordecai had said, keep your lineage and your family line, your people, a secret to when what you're doing. We don't entirely know why this is. You begin to get the idea as the story continues, and what at least Haman has some anti-Jewish views, and there were perhaps some others. Although anti-Semitism does not seem to be, say the historians, a massive issue in the ancient Persian world. I can either prove that or not. I mean, most of the historians don't really care about a Jewish perspective from that time either, so we really don't know. But we know that Haman at least doesn't care for Mordecai and his stock. It may also be that Mordecai already had this position at the gate before Esther came to power, and for whatever reason didn't want to mess things up for him or for her by revealing this family connection or that she's Jewish. So she has been keeping her lips sealed as far as where she comes from. And the king doesn't care where she comes from. He just cares she's beautiful and have fun with her. That's all he cares about. So, she's kept the secret so far. But again, she's someone who yields to Mordecai's wishes for her repeatedly. And that's the kind of posture she has, which is going to make it all the more striking when she goes uninvited to the king a little bit later. That's going to be a very contrast type of thing. They're kind of out of character for her, but needed. So, other questions about verses 19 and 20? We can thank our friends the Masoretes for preserving verses 19 and 20 for us, or we wouldn't even have them. And Bible study get out 5 minutes earlier today. All right, Esther 2:21 through 23, please. Steve on the second row has that. 2:21 to 23.
During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And true, the two officials were hanged on gallows. And all this was recorded in the book of the Annals, in the presence of the king.
Okay, Book of the Annals, not the Book of the Annals. That's a different group, yeah. Book of the Annals in the presence of the king. So during the time, I love mispronunciations, they're a great time. During the time Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate, so he is working for the king, is what we think is going on here. He's a royal official of some kind. Bigthana and Teresh. Now I'm told these names in Hebrew are fun to say. That's why we had 2 different lines of 7 officials or servants back in chapter 1. And the names are supposed to be funny to pronounce out loud, which is part of the author's mockery of Xerxes, Ahasuerus, his whole operation here. But Bigthana may be a spelling variation of Bigtha, who was one of the folks mentioned back in chapter 1, verse 10. Anyway, Bigthana, I don't know, it sounds like somebody's nickname. Anyway, Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officials who are responsible for some kind of guarding of his doorway. If your guards conspire against you, you're in trouble, because those are supposed to be your last line of defense. And these guys become angry, and they conspire to lay hands on Xerxes. Now, in our context, we lay hands. It's usually prayer for healing. In this context, laying hands is appropriately translated as assassinate. But they do this, notice, because they become angry. The last time we saw this word angry in chapter 1, guess who was becoming angry? King Xerxes. Ahasuerus himself was becoming angry. And so you may have a subtle play here. This guy whose anger is not necessarily very well controlled, actually anger is going to be his undoing sooner or later. In this case, not quite, because of Mordecai, but they are angry at the king, and they want to lay hands on him for the purpose of destroying him. And if your secret service is determined, your bodyguards determined to do you in, you are in a bad way. Verse 22, what happens? What happens in verse 22?
Mordecai hears it, finds out about it, and reports to Esther.
There you go. So our hero Mordecai, who is there at the king's gate, hears about the plot, probably because, he's among the workers there, and he finds out from another one, and so he's able to hear about it. And rather than telling the king directly, he tells Esther. Why do you think he does that? Strategy. It's going to look good for Esther, for sure, to reveal this.
As long as she says he's the one who figured it out, it still looks good for him, too.
It does look good for him. She gives credit to Mordecai. We're assuming that she both drops the name of Mordecai without indicating that she is related to Mordecai. We're assuming that's happening both ways here. She would have access to some of the royal officials that would not necessarily raise eyebrows, that Mordecai would tell this to her. Also, the king is dense and clueless. I think that's one of the layers we get about Ahasuerus in these chapters. And so she gives credit to Mordecai, resulting in 2 things. Verse 23. What happens in verse 23? I'm sorry, say it again. It was found to be true. It was a true report. That's a good thing. If you say something like this and it's not true, then you're in trouble. So it's found to be true. And what happens to our good friends Bigthana and Teresh? Yeah. Now, the actual Hebrew phrase is affixed to a tree or affixed to wood. So we've actually had a hard time interpreting this over the years, because different people in different eras have read this and they thought, oh, well, that means crucifixion. Well, that's because in the Roman world they did crucifixion. The Persians didn't do crucifixion. Or people said, oh, it's hung on a gallows. Well, that's more, other eras in history. But we actually think now, what the archaeologists say, is that what the Persians loved to do was impale people. That's what they did. And they'd kill you first and impale you for sport. And this has been true in many different times and places. If you want to make an example of the people whom you have overwhelmed, you want to, publicly display their dead bodies. And so impaling seems to be likely what happened here to Bigthana and Teresh. At any rate, it is not pleasant and painful and humiliating. And so they got their comeuppance. Was that a hand?
Back to Mordecai telling Esther, that might have been a safer way as far as going through several people so that it's not off your head.
Okay, yeah.
Esther
Mordecai may have been maneuvering there by telling Esther to avoid directly being the one who goes. I don't know how you get word of a secret plot to somebody. Maybe you have to, move it functional like that to avoid the heat that he could catch. Because somebody knew that he heard, or somebody may have known that he heard. We really don't know. Yeah. Seriously, yeah. Who do we trust in a context of this? But the other thing, this is very, very important. If Mordecai finds out that there is a plan to kill the king, and he feels compelled to report that, what might his motivations be? If he finds out there's a plot to kill the king and he feels the need to report that, what are his motivations? And there's probably multiple. Yeah, for Esther's benefit, right? For one thing, because if Esther's king is killed, there's a good chance the instability won't work out very well for her. So it is Esther's interest. It also indicates to us her favor over here. Obviously, his name is being dropped, although we don't know that he puts her up to dropping his name. We just know that she drops his name. But also indicates he's loyal to the king in some sense. So this is going to set us up for a surprise later when he's accused of being disloyal to the king. But notice in verse 23, after we have the investigation and the report is found to be true and Bigthana and Teresh are executed, what else happens at the end of verse 23? Yes, it's recorded in the King's Chronicles. We know now this has happened. One thing that we know from Persian history, I say we know, I know because I read about it, but one thing that the experts know about Persian history is Persian kings were good to reward people who did favors for them. It was a good thing to do a favor for a Persian king. They'd treat you real nicely. So you would expect at this point, Mordecai basically has saved the king's life. The king knows it was Mordecai. It is recorded that Mordecai did this in his books, in his presence. And so the very next thing we expect in chapter 3 will be the honoring of Mordecai for what he has done for the king. And then we'll be in, as Gomer Pyle might say, for a surprise, surprise, surprise. So let's go chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Chapter 3, Deline, please. Chapter 3, verses 1 and 2.
After these events, King Ahasuerus honored Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and promoted him and established his authority over all the officials who were with him. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded regarding him. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage.
Okay. So after these events, these things, meaning what Mordecai has done to save the king's life, King Xerxes honors Haman. Oh, yeah, boo, there we go. She's ready. She's geared up for this feast of Purim. Jamie's ready to go. So honors Haman of all things. And we have no reason, right? There's no reason given for why Haman gets an honor. He honors Haman. And it's redundant here. He honors him, he elevates him, he gives him a seat of honor. So he's really honoring the guy, higher than that of all the other nobles, all the other king's horses, all the king's men. So he is essentially in a Joseph or Daniel type position here. You're the vizier or the premier or whatever the term is for the sidekick to the king who's in charge of everything. Probably a good thing in some sense because Xerxes isn't terribly competent from what we've read so far. But anyway, he honors Haman, makes him his right-hand man, and there is no compelling reason. So we have this sharp contrast between Mordecai, for whom the king has a very compelling reason to elevate him, and Haman, who the king has no apparent reason from our vantage point to elevate, and yet it's Haman that gets honored and not Mordecai. So we've got this sense of, that's not quite right, starting out here. What did you say?
Workplace drama.
Yeah, workplace drama. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Todd deserves the promotion and somebody else got it, right? Yeah. So Haman is now the king's basically second in command. And we have repeated here, he is honored, he's raised up, he has been seated, his seat has been placed higher than all the other nobles and that sort of thing. What do we learn about Haman in verse 1 there of chapter 3? What do we learn about him? He's an Agagite. Agagite is fun to say. That is a loaded comment. You remember earlier when we read about Mordecai. Let's go back to 2:5. Esther 2:5. We read about Mordecai's pedigree in Esther 2 verses 5 and 6. There was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, and we learned that his family had come over to exile in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, during the days of Jehoiakim, probably 597 BC, around in which a lot of nobles were taken. But he is a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin. Significantly, King Saul, Israel's first king, was in the tribe of Benjamin, and Saul's daddy's name was Kish, who is one of the ancestors listed here for Mordecai. We have solidly placed Mordecai in the family of Saul. Maybe not a direct descendant, but he's from the right stock, and by dropping the fact that his great-grandfather's name was Kish is supposed to make us think of Saul's daddy Kish. And so we've introduced Mordecai as a Saul relative. Now we meet Haman, and he is an Agagite. And so we need to dig a bit into the history of the Agagites and Saul. Let's see how much you want to do here. Let's go way back to Exodus. How about that? Exodus 17. Little field trip here today. Taking the risk of a long and winding rabbit trail, but we'll do it anyway, because we're not in a hurry here at Wednesday Morning Bible Study. Exodus 17, 8 through 16. They have come out of Egypt. They have not yet gotten into the promised land, and this is what's going on. Did you want that, Randy? Exodus 17, 8 through 16. Mm-hmm.
Then came Amalek and fought with Israel and
Rephidim.
And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out of men and go out, fight with Amalek tomorrow. I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses had said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and he took a stone and put it under him and sat there. And he sat there, and Aaron and Hur stayed up against his hands on the one side and the other on the other side. His hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua just confided Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. And I will utterly put on the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Jehovah Nissi. For he said, because the Lord hath sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation.
Okay, thank you. So the Israelites here at this stage in the journey, just after the Exodus, are portrayed as vulnerable, and the Amalekites come out and attack them, and this is seen as a not good thing at all. So you have this bad history with Amalek and the people of Israel going all the way back to the early days after the Exodus, and so there's this promise really from the Lord that if you remember this, I'll blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven, and there's going to be war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. The Israelites and the Amalekites don't like each other. That's step number one on the journey. Let's go on down to Numbers 24. Numbers 24. And we're going to find our good friend Balaam. Balaam was hired by Balak to curse the Israelites, but he couldn't do it. He had all kinds of good things, as it turns out, to say about Israel. And he had a very spiritually perceptive donkey. Numbers 24, verse 7. Who would like that? All right, Norm, thank you.
Water will flow from their buckets. Their seed will have abundant water. Their king will be greater than Agag. Their kingdom will be exalted.
Okay, Agag is actually, later on in history, one of the Amalekites. We'll find him in a minute. A little more sense, though. Norm, a few verses later there, verse 20. Read that one as well. Another part of Balaam's speaking. Verse 20 of Numbers 24. Verse 20. Excuse me.
Then Balaam saw Amalek and spoke his message. Amalek was
Okay, so this is bad news for the Amalekites and Agag, who we find out later on is one of the Amalekites. Why the word Agag was used in verse 7, I don't know. I'm assuming there was a final touch put on numbers later on after Agag, the guy, lives and dies. But the Amalekites and Agag are going to have a bad situation. Deuteronomy 25. And we'll read, what do I have there? 17 through 19? 17 through 19 of Deuteronomy 25. Jeff has this one. Thank you.
Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about, in the land which the Lord thy God give thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it.
Okay, so this gives us our analysis of what the Amalekites did in the days of Exodus to the people of Israel, that they smote thee when you were vulnerable and weak, right? That was what his translation said. And so because of this, you will blot the memory of them out from under heaven. Don't forget this. So we get the idea, and especially given Balaam's prophecies back there in chapter 24, that because of what the Amalekites wrongly did to God's people Israel coming out from the promise, or out from Egypt and beginning their journey of the Exodus, because of what they did and because it was wrong, they're going to experience judgment and they will be wiped out. That is the expectation. Now we go to 1 Samuel. And in 1 Samuel, we meet Saul. We meet him as the son of Kish in chapter 9, but let's go to chapter 15. 1 Samuel chapter 15. We will not read the whole thing. Let's do the first... I'm just going to read it because that way I can interrupt and pronounce these fun names. How about that? 1 Samuel 15, and I'll just read until I decide we've read enough. 1 Samuel 15, here we go. Samuel said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Waylaid, by the way, is one of my favorite Old Testament words. We never use it today, but waylaid, they use it all over the place. So anyway, you can impress your friends, use that word. So we know this backstory now, right? Verse 2. We know that backstory because we've read from Exodus. So the Lord's going to punish them for what they did for you coming out from Egypt. Verse 3 of 1 Samuel 15. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. That would be squarely in the category of some of those very uncomfortable situations we see multiple times in the Old Testament. The word to totally destroy can mean technically totally destroy, or it can mean fully give over. But for the purposes of our story, it definitely means don't let their king live and don't save the good livestock for your own benefit. That's enough to know for right now. If you want to talk more about the problem of violence in the Old Testament, we can do that. I'm hoping to not get on that rabbit trail today. Verse 4, so Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, go away, leave the Amalekites, so I do not destroy you along with them, for you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came out of Egypt. So the Kenites moved away from the Amalekites. The Kenites are no fools. Get out of here before we destroy your friends. Then Saul, verse 7, attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, to the east of Egypt. He took Agag, there you go, Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and his army spared Agag, and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak they totally destroyed. So those are our alarm bells here. He has kept King Agag of the Amalekites alive, and they have kept the best of the livestock alive for their own benefit, heartily giving everything over fully to the Lord. Verse 10, then the word of the Lord came to Samuel. I am grieved that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. Samuel was troubled, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told Saul has gone to Carmel. I'm going to drop off the reading right there. Later on, Samuel confronts Saul, basically says, because you didn't obey the Lord, you're losing your kingship. And then Samuel himself says, Agag, come here. And Agag thinks it's good news. Hey, things are better now. And Samuel himself kills Agag, and that is the end of him. Questions or comments about the Agag background story here? Questions or comments? Yes, Todd.
If we're blotting out the memory of the Amalekites,
Mm-hmm.
then why are they showing up again?
Well, this is-
Agag actually showing up again.
Right,
And
right. This is supposed
clearly Mordecai remembers.
This is supposed to be the fulfillment of that promise, but Saul messes it up because he doesn't follow instructions. So effectively speaking, Agag is wiped out and the Amalekites at this point. However, there may have been a kind of a diaspora type of thing, a remnant type of thing. And so that's the stock from which Haman comes later on.
So it's a point that they didn't totally get wiped out?
Yeah. You see, especially in the book of Judges, but even to some extent in Joshua, it's just a failure to totally do what they're supposed to do. And the failure is seen as being a result of disobedience to the Lord. And certainly Saul here is less than obedient as well. So there is supposed to be judgment coming on the Amalekites and on their king Agag. Obviously Agag wasn't the one who was historically alive back in the days of the Exodus, but they're going to get what's coming to them. But Saul's failure is part of what didn't happen here. So this is why then you have Mordecai, a descendant of Saul, from Saul's tribe anyway, having this showdown with Haman, a descendant of Agag, an Amalekite, and now that's what gives meaning to this showdown in the book of Esther. Did you have another?
I'm just thinking of like the decisions in scripture that have like consequences, like way down like, Abraham and Hagar, and then like Esther wouldn't have happened maybe without if Saul had been obedient.
Yeah, you have decisions earlier in history that make a problem later on down the line. And clearly that's what's going on here, at least the way our narrator in Esther is telling it, that our showdown here between Mordecai and Haman is an age-old problem that was never dealt with, largely because of Saul's disobedience and that sort of thing.
Is this the genesis of anti-Semitism?
Well, I don't know if it's the genesis or not. I think the genesis of anti-Semitism is as soon as the Israelites crossed the river. And really maybe even before that. We know the Egyptians didn't care for non-Egyptian people. But when they start coming in and taking land, that obviously makes them unpopular. But I don't know if I can say there was one point where this becomes an issue. I think it's a little more complicated than that. But obviously there's friction with the people of God and the other people all the way on through. And so yeah, this is another example of it for sure.
Well, if Israel is God's chosen people, then Satan's going to be against Israel. So anti-Semitism has to do with
Sure.
Satan
So
trying to.
right. So there's a spiritual issue there as far as if Israel's God's chosen people, you'd expect some resistance. There's also simply a geopolitical issue. If two different groups of people want the same plot of land, you're going to have a problem. And then there's just people don't get along, and that's part of it as well. So there's kind of multiple layers of the whole thing. Yeah.
From the geopolitical side, I've heard one person say, they question whether Israel has a right to the land that is land of Israel and everything. They said, well, the Jews still exist. You don't see the Amalek and the Amalekites existing that they can make a claim to the property. So
No, you
these
don't.
other people that are making claims don't have the long-term claim that the Jews do.
Right. I mean, that's true. There obviously have been multiple different groups of people over the years that have lived in that space. Not wanting to delve into the whole commentary on that issue at the moment, but suffice to say, the anti-Semitism is nothing new and has been around a long time, and it's at least alive and well in the days of Esther, so far as our story is concerned. Other questions or comments? I will say as a tease, if you want more information, this totally destroy, this harem, I think is the right word. Delene can tell me, she's our Hebrew expert here. But the word for fully giving over to the Lord or totally destroying, which can be a little bit both, couple things is it sometimes is used in a hyperbole type of way. One team totally destroyed the other team, but then as it turns out, they went to the locker room and got on the bus and went home. So some of that happens. It also is as giving over to the Lord. There are some ancient records of one people group totally destroying another and then imposing taxes on them. Well, how do you tax them if you totally destroy them? So there's a little bit of storytelling going on maybe with some of this. Exaggerating that sort of thing. But also, obviously a lot of people die and that's a bad thing. So how do we handle this? I'll say a couple of comments and I'll refer you to a few videos. One is the Lord does not take pleasure in the destruction of anyone. And that's explicit in Ezekiel, but it's lots of other places too. And then the other thing is Resurrection Day is coming and God will take care of vindicating everyone on Resurrection Day one way or the other. So I'm confident that if anybody was wrongly killed in any of these things we see in the Old Testament, that the Lord will handle that. And there will be a day where everything gets sorted out rightly. But I had a professor at seminary, Lawson Stone, and there's a publishing house called Seedbed, which is what the seminary means actually, Seedbed, and they have a lot of 7-minute seminary videos, all of which are helpful. Dr. Stone is utterly unable to do something in 7 minutes, so his videos are about 10 or 11 minutes, but he has 3 videos on Seedbed on YouTube, you can find it, about the problem of violence in the Old Testament. And he digs in some of the stuff in a helpful way. So if you want to do some viewing, it'll take you about a half hour total to watch all 3 of those. But Lawson Stone, Seedbed, Problem of Violence in the Old Testament, you can search that on YouTube. And it's very entertaining, actually. There's some flies landing on his face constantly while he's trying to do this thing. So he's on site in Israel when he does this. So pretty fun. But it deals with a difficult topic here. But the point, as far as we're concerned, is Saul was supposed to take care of business, and he didn't do it. And so he did not obey, and so that's why we have this problem in Esther. Any other questions about that before we dig in? Yes.
Back to Haman
Yes.
getting, after the incident of somebody having fought against him, he's the kind of person that coddles the king, like, oh, somebody's letting me get, you're in danger, I'll be the one to protect you, we can take care of this, just let me handle it all.
Yeah.
That can be a reason why.
Yeah.
Gets into, elevated.
Yeah. So Sandy is joining the speculation as to why Haman gets elevated. Maybe he made promises to the king, hey, I can help you from something like this happening again. Our character sketch of Haman we're going to get, though, is going to sound an awful lot like somebody like Bigthan and Teresh who were doing this plot against the king. And so it's quite possible he's of sinister stock and he's doing his own route at trying to get power. He definitely likes power and attention. So does Haman. So anyway, Haman is elevated. That was just chapter 3, verse 1. That took like 20 minutes. Wasn't that fun? So Haman is elevated to this position, right-hand man, vizier, whatever you want to call him, in Ahasuerus' kingdom. And what do all of the royal officials do in verse 2 of Esther chapter 3? What do they all do? Yeah, they bow down or kneel down and they pay homage, they honor Haman. They bow down, they honor Haman. They do both those things. And because the king had commanded so, you can imagine this is like a lot of the other king's commands in this. When Xerxes commands something, it's not because it was his own brilliant idea, it's because somebody else put him up to it. And he says, sounds good to me. And so the king has backed Haman's power grab here and says, sure, all my officials have to bow down and pay him homage, but we have a plot complicating note at the end of verse 2. What is it? Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. He wouldn't kneel down and honor the king. This raises the question, why? Why does Mordecai not bow down and pay homage to, Haman? Why does he not kneel and honor Haman? And what did you say?
Because he should be the one we honor.
Okay, there's one explanation. So people are suggesting that maybe Mordecai is proud, his pride is hurt, he should have been honored, not Haman, and so maybe there's a stubborn thing there. That is one angle of thinking. Other possibilities.
There's a note in my Bible that says that Mordecai was a Benjaminite, and
There you go, homage. He knows the stories we just read here all the way on through. He knows the people who are from the Amalekite line, and Haman is one of those. And he is from the line of Benjamin. Saul, had this showdown with Agag the Amalekite. And so there could be an ethnic grudge going on. That could certainly be. Why else is Mordecai not bowing down or paying honor? There's a few other options as well. I didn't think of these on my own. I've read some books. Yes, Deline.
Finding back to the Ten Commandments, like you should not have no other gods before.
Yeah.
With Daniel.
Yeah.
And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Sure.
Pretty much in there.
Yes.
For him as well.
Yes, so Deline says, hey, 10 Commandments, have no other gods before me. You think about the lineage, of the history, I should say, of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these refusals to worship. Clearly, Daniel is in mind for the author of Esther, a few different places. There's some allusions made there. And we think most famously of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 3, as Deline was referring to here. After Daniel interprets the dream in which Nebuchadnezzar is part of a statue that gets toppled, then the very next chapter, Nebuchadnezzar's like, I should make a statue of me, And I'm like, not even connecting with anything here. And of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down. And that chapter, just like Esther 1, has this comical list of all the officials of the king who are bowing down and all this sort of stuff. What's interesting, though, is that bowing down and paying honor to a human being is not expressly forbidden in the Israelite tradition, the Jewish tradition. In fact, there are examples when it happens and it's okay. Much as like today in a place like Japan or someplace, you would bow as a way of honoring, just like we shake hands or whatever. And there's nothing theologically wrong with that. So there's some debating as to what is going on here exactly. Is this an idolatry thing or not? Now, the Greek lengthening of the Hebrew text, so that the Greek versions are longer, gives some explanation that kind of go along that line, that in fact Mordecai has some theological scruples, and that's why he won't do it. It is interesting that this pairing of words, in verse 2 it happens twice. The verb that gets translated knelt down and the verb paid honor repeats twice there, each of those do in verse 2. And then again down in verse 5, Haman sees that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. And again, you may have bow, pay homage, it doesn't really matter at that point. It's the same two pairs of verbs. These show up several places in the Old Testament together, and when they do, except for one time, it's always in the context of worshiping Yahweh, the God of Israel. So you get the idea. The combo of words may get toward Deline's point here. There is a theological concern. Haman is demanding some kind of divine honor almost, and I won't give you that. That is a good possibility. The only pushback that I found to that in what I was reading is that people are saying, well, not even Ahasuerus was claiming to be divine at this point. So if Haman's claiming to be divine, how does that work? But I think a simple explanation for that is Ahasuerus is pretty dense. Xerxes is clueless about some things, so he may not be aware of this. But one more possibility, and Sandy kind of got after this with the analysis of Haman's motives. It is quite possible that Mordecai, having saved the king's life from these angry and vain men who tried to take it, sees Haman as the same kind of stock. So it could be the ethnic thing, it could be the theological thing, it also could be, this is the kind of guy I will not bow the knee to because I know what he's like, because I've hung out at the King's Gate for a while. All three of those things are possible. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. They could all be true. But he has lots of compelling reasons possibly to not bow down before Haman and pay him honor. And just as happened with Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, or really as happened when Daniel would pray when he wasn't supposed to pray to the God of Israel, you have this being noticed by other people. So let's read verse, oh yes, Bob, go for it.
Any theologians thinking that maybe the reason the king promoted Haman was because he was the one that verified what Mordecai had said?
Yeah, I don't know.
And carried out the execution of the two.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Did Haman have a role in confirming Mordecai's sources and in the execution? And the answer is I don't know. This is all part of that precious little detail that we're given. There's all kinds of great theories about what could have happened. And you can write your thesis on that one, Bob, because I haven't seen that one yet. So anyway, but yeah.
In charge of the secret police.
Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, I don't know. All kinds of possibilities as to why Haman gets honored. But what the author of Esther wants us to think is we have all kinds of good reasons for Mordecai to get promoted. and we have no known reason for Haman, and yet Haman gets promoted, and Mordecai gets shunned, and Persian kings are supposed to take care of people who do favors like this. So the author of Esther wants us to feel the outrage, the injustice here. And in addition to that, Haman wants all the officials to kneel down and pay homage to him. Who is this guy? So our pedigree for Haman is not good at this point. And then his ancestors, Agag from 1 Samuel. Oh my goodness, this is just a bad news guy here. So we the informed readers of the Hebrew Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, would say this is a bad deal here. Let's go ahead and read verses 3 through 6 to land the plane, sort of, and then we'll pick it back up again next week. Verses 3 through 6, Esther chapter 3. Liz has it. Thank you.
Then the palace officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why are you disobeying the king's command?" They spoke to him day after day, but still he refused to comply with the order. So they spoke to Haman about this to see if he would tolerate Mordecai's conduct, since Mordecai had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He had learned Mordecai's nationality, so he decided it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire empire of Xerxes.
Okay, you guys have another hour to unpack all this? So the royal officials at the king's gate, we get the servants at the king's gate. These are people who work for the king, and Mordecai is among them. And they say to him, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" There is some question here about their motives at this point. Are they saying this out of pure curiosity, or are they saying this because they're in a conspiracy, as we see in the book of Daniel, the people trying to catch Daniel and what he did because they're jealous? And we really don't know. But they have noticed that he is not obeying the king's command to bow down and give honor to Haman. Verse 4, this is fascinating. The opening phrase of verse 4, my translation, day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. That almost identical phrase shows up one other place in the Hebrew Scriptures. Anybody know where it is? Day after day after day, refused to comply. You know where that is? Joseph. It's Genesis chapter 39, when Potiphar's wife is trying to seduce Joseph into having a fling with her, and he says no, day after day refuses to comply. So we're bringing in the Joseph story again. There's actually several echoes of the Joseph story, just as echoes of the Daniel story here in Esther. And one of them is, just as Joseph was persistent in doing the right thing, even when he was given many opportunities not to, so also Mordecai now refuses to do the wrong thing, even when he's given many opportunities to do the wrong thing. So same kind of thing there. Therefore, they told Haman about it to see whether his behavior would be tolerated. Will this kind of thing happen? And we think about Vashti, right, saying no to the king in chapter 1. Will that kind of behavior be tolerated? Same kind of thinking here. Is this going to be allowed to stand? He had told them he was a Jew. So that gets back to our conversation a few minutes ago. Something about his Jewishness has to do with his refusal to worship. Either it is theologically, this would be an idolatrous type of thing, the kind of worship that Haman is demanding, or, because of his people and this whole storyline here about the Amalekites and the Israelites. But for some reason, he gives this ethnic explanation for why I can't. And we're wanting to see if this will be an acceptable exemption clause in the eyes of King Ahasuerus to not bow down and give honor to Haman. And when Haman saw this, because apparently Haman hadn't noticed, there's a lot of people bowing down to him. It's hard to notice just one. When he saw that Mordecai, in fact, was not kneeling down or honoring him, how did Haman feel?
Didn't bother.
Well, yeah, he was not unfazed. Yeah, he was not overjoyed. He was not unfazed. He is ticked off. So anger in the book of Esther has been shown as a bad thing so far. We had the king himself. We had the conspirators for his assassination. And now Haman also is of the same stock. He's a guy who flies in a rage when he doesn't get the honor he wants. Just like King Xerxes Ahasuerus, when Vashti did not honor him, he was angry. He didn't get the honor he wanted. So we're back to thinking about why do we get angry, reasons we get angry. And here we find that Haman is angry because he didn't get the honor that he wanted. This is pretty great. He had all the people bowing down to him, all the royal officials, and one won't do it, and he is ticked off. And verse 6, having learned who his people were, Mordecai's people were, apparently Haman has a memory too, he scorned the idea of laying hands, there's that phrase again, only on Mordecai. Instead, he wants to kill all the Jews. Where have we seen this kind of overreaction before in the book of Esther? Anybody remember? Where have we taken a personal matter and made it an empire-wide crisis?
In the beginning, when Vashti refused.
Yes. When Vashti refused to come before the king, the advisors say, all the women of the empire are going to rebel against their husbands. The women are out of control, say the drunken men at their feast of 187 days, right? So it's the women are the problem, say the men. And so we need to make an example of Vashti and send the decree out to all the empires so that all the women will fear and tremble and respect their husbands. I've embellished that a bit, but basically that's what happens here. So this is the second time that a man gets angry because he doesn't get the glory he wants and decides to take it out not on one individual, but on a whole empire of individuals. And so we've done the same thing here. And you get the idea that the Jewish thing, the Jew Agagite thing, it means something to Haman just as it does to Mordecai. We can unpack that more next week. By the way, scorn is the same word. So Haman scorns the idea of killing only Mordecai. Scorn is the same word that shows up back in chapter 17 when the king's advisors are are afraid that the women will scorn their husbands. Yes.
You were talking a minute ago, I just thought of like the disproportional nature of anger. Like,
Yeah.
not that any of it's right, but like to take it to that extreme,
Yeah.
like just anger just compels you to, I mean, again, not that the original reason is even right, but it just takes it even farther than it should
Yeah.
be, I guess.
Yeah. Anger has a tendency to get out of control, especially when it's the wrong kind of anger. The anger that we've seen so far in here is very selfish anger, and very vain anger. And that kind of anger especially is prone to going off the rails. And so this is Psalm 5, in your anger do not sin, search your hearts and be silent. This is Ephesians, don't let the sun go down to wrath, in your anger don't sin. This kind of, I think there's a spiritual word about anger in Esther. Why am I angry? And sort out my anger, Lord, and help me to respond. Right? Anger is something you're going to feel. Anger is a part of life. You're going to be angry. We're going to be angry. The question, what do we do with that? And if we're really doing this, search me, oh God, know my heart type of thing, what can we save ourselves?
A lot of anger in our world today, too, and it
Yeah.
doesn't just stop with one or two people, like it spreads to everybody that could be
Right.
considered in a certain group or in a certain whatever, and it's just checking that in our hearts so that we're able to still love people.
Yeah, we live in a very angry world, and anger is very contagious. And we find ourselves getting angry about stuff. Somebody else is angry. I didn't even know about it. And now that I do, now I'm angry, either with them or at them, And so search our hearts, Lord, and save us from this. Because one of the commentaries of Esther is anger out of control is bad news. And especially vain, selfish, drunken anger that craves power and attention. That kind of anger is not a good thing. So stay away from that kind of anger and be careful of people who manifest that kind of anger and hubris combo tied together. So we have gotten to, this is a great place to end because I know you'll come back next week. Because oh my goodness, what's going to happen to Mordecai's people? This is a tremendous overreaction from Haman. And so he wants to kill all of Mordecai's people. What in the world are we going to do? And for that, we'll come back next week for the next part of the story beginning in Esther 3, verse 7. I've taken you into overtime again today. Let's pray, and then we will dismiss. Lord, thank you for this story. And this is like the third time now we've gotten a warning about anger in this. So I pray you'll help us to search our hearts. I pray you'll help us to sort through the things that we're angry about. There may be anger in our hearts today that goes back decades. I pray you'd help us to unearth that with your Spirit and lay that at your feet and experience some freedom from that. And I pray that when we find ourselves angry, even today, you'd sort us out, that we would not be the kind that escalate and overblow, but the kind that forgive and de-escalate and are instruments of your grace. Because, Jesus, you have shown us the greatest grace of the cross, and we exist because of it. So help us to do that, we pray. And we confess, Holy Spirit, we need your help in that. We cannot do that easily. I thank you for this wonderful group. We pray you'll gather us together again next week, that we can continue this journey. And we pray you keep on shaping us to your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye to the internet here. and we'll see you next Wednesday.